My true story from Oklahoma. My son dug a grave and said, "Sign the will or sleep in it." He threatened to bury me alive unless I signed everything over. I didn't flinch because I knew whose name was already on that headstone. The slap landed hard across my face, the sound echoing against the trellis and the porcelain teacups. My head tilted slightly with the force, but I did not flinch. I did not raise a hand to my cheek. I simply looked up at my son Jared standing there in his pressed linen suit, sweat beading at his temple, a shovel clenched tight in his hand. Behind him, the open grave gaped like a secret exposed too soon. It was freshly dug. 6 feet of raw Oklahoma earth. The roses trembled slightly in the breeze, but everything else, the guests, the air, my own breath, seemed to freeze. "Sign it," Jared said through gritted teeth, "or sleep in it." I folded my hands calmly in my lap, fingers brushing the smooth hem of my pale blue skirt. My voice was steady when I said, "You once swore that if you ever turned your back on me, the Lord would not forgive you." Do you remember that, Jared? You were 8. You cried into your pillow for 2 nights after your father left. Jared snorted. "God has no eyes, Mother. Money does. And right now, money says, I am doing the right thing. You should be grateful. I am giving you a choice." Megan, his wife, stepped forward, her heels crunching lightly against the gravel path. Her voice was shrill. "You think anyone here feels sorry for you, Rose? Look at you playing the victim in your little garden party while the world moves on. You are outdated, pretty redundant." Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, others pretended to sip from empty glasses. But no one said a word, no one dared. I turned my gaze back to Jared, then to the grave. Then I smiled. "If Emily could see you now," I said softly, "she would not smile from where she lies. She would not be proud of her brother." The name hit the garden like a dropped glass. "Emily!" Jared stiffened. Megan's face palled beneath her flawless foundation. Even the roses seemed to stop breathing. "Leave her out of this," Jared hissed. "Why? Because she is the only one who ever made you feel second best? Or because deep down you know she saw through you before the rest of us did?" He stepped closer. The shovel scraped against the edge of the stone border. "Emily is gone," he said, "and she is not coming back." I nodded slowly. "Yes, gone, but not forgotten. I still remember the way she laughed in this garden. I still remember the last poem she wrote, the one she left on your desk, the one you threw in the fire." Jared's eyes darkened. Megan reached for his arm. "Jared, enough, just get her to sign." I looked out over the crowd. Familiar faces, neighbors, church acquaintances, a few cousins. All had once eaten at my table. All now watched like spectators at a slow-motion execution. I stood. "This garden," I said, gesturing to the blossoms around us, "was planted the year Emily was born. Every spring she would name each new bloom. She called that one Liberty because it bloomed early. She called the white ones Mercy, and the deep red ones she named them Redemption." I took a step toward Jared. He did not move. "You dug a hole, son. You filled it with dirt and threats and the stink of betrayal, but you did not check the roots. You never asked yourself whose name might already be written on the stone." He said nothing. Megan's grip tightened. "Sign the paper, Mother," Jared said again, his voice lower, almost trembling. I tilted my head. "I buried a child, Jared. There is nothing left in this world that can scare me. You think you can bury me too? Go ahead. But when you do, remember this. I will not be the one rotting beneath lies. That will be you." The wind shifted again. A petal drifted into the grave. For a moment, no one moved. Then I reached into my shawl and touched the envelope tucked close to my chest, but I did not pull it out. Not yet. Let them squirm a little longer. The dead were watching after all. Emily was my youngest, my joy, the quietest fire I ever knew. From the time she could speak, she would recite little rhymes and name clouds like saints. Her father adored her in a way that was soft but unmistakable. When he died, he left her a portion of the estate, art, land, and his books. It was not about value. It was about trust. Jared noticed. Jared, my firstborn, had always carried the invisible weight of being the eldest. When he was little, he would puff his chest whenever anyone praised Emily. He would pretend not to care. But I saw him once standing in the hallway as his father hugged Emily after her piano recital. Jared's little fists were clenched at his sides. His eyes were wet, but he would not cry. Not in front of us, not in front of her. That resentment grew roots. By the time Jared turned 24, he had distanced himself from us. Work, ambition, a a sharp-tongued girlfriend who later became his wife. Megan only fueled the competition, made everything transactional. Emily stayed soft, never fought back, never played that game. She painted, she wrote, she gave me wildflowers, she picked by the roadside. I remember the day she handed me a pressed daisy and said, "You always keep going, Mama, even in drought." She was 22 when she vanished. The police said it was an accident, a single car crash on the river road. Her car was found burned, twisted into the guardrail. No body, just ashes, metal, melted glass. I never believed it. Not fully. Something in me knew it did not make sense. She never drove that road, not alone, not at that hour. Jared barely reacted. He handled the funeral arrangements like a boardroom transaction, a closed casket service. No photographs allowed. He stood with Megan, one hand on her hip, and accepted condolences like a politician. Weeks later, he bought a new house. Months later, his name appeared on deeds that used to be in my husband's trust. I watched it happen with my mouth shut, but my heart wide open. I remembered what Emily had once whispered to me in the garden when she caught Jared yelling on the phone. "He is not angry at you, Mama," she said. "He is angry at being unloved. He just never learned the difference between love and possession." That line stayed with me. Now, standing above the grave, he dug for me. I asked myself the question I had been too afraid to say out loud. Whose body was really in that car? Or had Jared not buried Emily at all, but a part of himself? Perhaps the part that once cried for butterflies, for bedtime prayers, for his mother's approval. Perhaps he buried this boy he could never become, and now he stood before me trying to bury me too. But I had already survived the worst. I had survived losing her, and that made me dangerous. Emily was light. That is the only word I ever felt matched her. Not just because she was fair-haired and soft-spoken, not because she liked white linen dresses and walked barefoot in the garden even after the frost settled, but because she carried something gentle in her. Something unbreakable in its grace. She was the kind of child who asked questions like, "Do sunflowers get lonely when the sun sets?" She was not like Jared, and that was the beginning of everything. From the moment she could talk, she had a way of making people pause. Her voice had a cadence that made you listen. My husband Charles adored her. He called her his sunbeam. Jared noticed. Of course he did. He was 7 when Emily was born. Old enough to understand what it meant when his father stopped calling him first and started carrying a tiny pink bundle into every room like it was the heart of the house. I remember the day Jared stood by the doorway, watching Charles rock Emily to sleep. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles went white. I had baked cornbread that morning. The smell should have been comforting. But that image of Jared, silent, eyes burning with something he was too young to name, has stayed with me longer than any scent or taste. Charles never meant harm, but he came from a line that believed sons must be strong and daughters must be cherished. Jared was expected to lead, to carry, to sacrifice. Emily was simply loved. When Charles died unexpectedly of a stroke, Emily was 16. Jared was already off at college, struggling to meet the expectations no one had voiced, but he felt in every bone. Emily grieved quietly. She wrote poems and planted more roses. Jared came home. He blamed her, though he never said it, not directly, but his eyes did. The will, Charles's final message, left equal shares of everything to both children. But he added one line. For Emily, the lake house and the trust I began in her name. Use it for her art, her books, her freedom. Jared read that line 3 times. I saw his jaw shift. He folded the will with care, but his hands were shaking. After the funeral, Jared never came back home the same way. He visited, yes, but it was different. Shorter stays, colder greetings. Megan came into the picture around that time. Pretty, polished, hungry, the kind of girl who watched what everyone wore and kept score of who had the bigger ring. Emily tried. She always tried. I remember the last picture I took of the two of them. Emily reaching out to tuck a flower into Megan's hair. Megan pulling away like my daughter carried a disease. Jared laughed nervously and took Megan's hand. Emily smiled, but it never reached her eyes. I framed the photo anyway. It still sits in my bedroom drawer. The night Emily disappeared was cold. She had come home from the university to visit. She was 22. She brought a book of her latest poems, eager to read me one about forgiveness and winter. She said, "Mom, do you think people ever become storms on purpose, or are they just scared of quiet?" I did not know what she meant then. I do now. That evening, she got a call. She said it was from Jared. She left wearing her yellow scarf. That was the last time I saw her. The police said it was an accident, that she must have taken a curve too fast. Her car was found by the riverbank, burnt. They never found her body, only melted remnants. The scarf was never recovered. The coroner signed a presumptive death certificate. Case closed. But I never cried it because Jared did not cry at her vigil. He stood stiff, hands folded, Megan dabbing her eyes while stealing glances at the estate lawyer across the aisle. 2 months later, they moved into the house Charles had built for our family without asking. Jared petitioned to transfer the title. I did not fight then. I should have, but part of me was still waiting for Emily to walk back through the door, wet from the rain, holding that yellow scarf. Jared's wealth seemed to grow overnight. He left his job in the city and started a consulting business. He bought Megan a new car. He laughed more, but not the laugh I knew. It was hollow, like something echoing off a coffin lid. I began to watch him the way I used to watch snakes in the garden, never blinking. One night, alone in my room, I opened Emily's last journal. It had been in her backpack, found untouched in the car trunk. Most of it was filled with poems and drawings, pressed flowers, but near the end, she had scribbled a sentence in bold ink. If anything happens to me, it won't be nature's fault. I read that line until the candle burned out. And even in the dark, I saw her face. I knew. I knew in my bones, the way mothers know when the air changes in their sleep. My son had buried something more than a body, and I was going to find out what. He thought the fire had erased her. But the truth does not burn. It waits, it whispers, it roots itself in a mother's ribs. He dug the grave, thinking he was burying her. He did not realize. He was already digging his own. It was Jared who suggested the beach trip. Let's reset, he said over the phone. His voice dipped in syrup, too sweet to be real. Florid, just you and me, Mom. You need a break and we need to talk like old times. I knew better than to trust the sudden warmth, but I agreed anyway. Not because I believed him, but because I needed to see how far he would go. A mother can only prepare for war if she walks into the enemy's camp once in a while. We flew down 2 days later. Megan did not come. She claimed she had a spa weekend booked. Jared rented a house by the water just a few feet from where the sand kissed the edge of the Atlantic. It was beautiful, almost too much, the kind of place you book when you want people to believe you're making amends. He poured wine, grilled shrimp, smiled too easily. He asked about my childhood, about my health, about the garden. The shovel in the graveyard tone from the garden party gone, replaced with a son who said things like, "We've been through a lot, haven't we?" I played along. I wore my sunglasses even when the sun dipped below the horizon, so he could not see my eyes calculating him like a balance sheet. On the third morning, he asked if I wanted to take the kayak out. "We'll just drift," he said. "No paddling needed. I'll do all the work." That part at least was true. We launched from a quiet cove, the world still damp with morning mist. He paddled us out just far enough that the houses were specks and the beach was a thread of gold behind us. The water was calm. So calm, I remember thinking it felt like glass deceptively still. "Do you remember when Dad took us to Lake Texoma?" he asked suddenly. I did. Emily had worn that ridiculous sun hat, and Jared had thrown her into the water out of jealousy. Charles had laughed too loud. Emily had cried. Jared had claimed it was just a joke. I turned to him now and said, "Yes, you pushed her." He smiled. Some people were never meant for deep water. Then he stood just slightly enough to rock the kayak. I gripped the sides, steadying myself, but he moved again, this time leaning hard to the right. "Careful," I warned. "Mom," he said softly. "You know how tired I am, don't you? Tired of dragging your name behind mine. Tired of waiting for things to pass to me when they should already be mine. You've had a good life. You've had enough." And with that, he shifted his weight with intention. The kayak tilted, I slid, water swallowed me like a closing mouth. I remember the cold first. Then the silence. Then the way panic tried to climb into my throat and scream its way out. But something else surfaced instead. Emily. She had taught me how to float, how to move slowly in the water, to trust the stillness, to never fight the current, unless you were sure where it led. We had trained for a summer trip to Europe, but we never made it. Still, the lessons stuck. My limbs remembered even when my fear forgot. I surfaced, gasping. Jared was already paddling back, shouting, She slipped. She slipped." To no one, I watched his back, and in that moment, soaked and betrayed in the middle of the Atlantic, I made a promise to myself that did not require thunder or a witness. I would survive. Not just the water, not just the lies. I would survive him. I swam back alone. The coast was farther than I thought, but I moved slow, steady. My legs burned, my chest ached, but I reached the sand without screaming. No lifeguard, no crowd, no dramatics. Jared was already on the phone pretending to call for help. He hung up when he saw me walking up the beach, my hair dripping, my eyes steady. "You okay?" he asked, his face tight with something he could not name. I nodded. "You were right, Jared. I have had a good life, and I'm not done yet." He tried to laugh. "It was just an accident." "Of course," I said, just like the others. I said nothing else. We flew back the next morning. I sat in silence the whole flight, penning names in my notebook. Dates, passwords, numbers I had memorized over the years and never used. My hand did not shake once. Back home, I changed the locks to my safe. I pulled out the envelope marked Akanor. I made tea. Then I started to plan. He had tried the sea. Next time I would let the law do the drowning, because the ocean did not take me that day. But I took everything he showed me, and I stored it deep like salt in bone. The truth floats, but revenge that sinks beautifully. The clerk at the passport office looked up from my paperwork and raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to use this name, ma'am?" I nodded. "Mary O'Connor, born in Texas, widow. Quiet." He shrugged, stamped the form, and moved on to the next file. That was the first official recognition of the name I had chosen for my new self. Not a disguise, but a reclamation. Mary had been my mother's name. Akanor was the name of the woman who taught me how to read contracts at age 62. I was not hiding. I was reintroducing myself. The trip to the Bahamas had been planned in silence. No one knew. Not the neighbors, not the church ladies, not even the pharmacist who always asked about my blood pressure. I told Jared I was visiting an old friend in Arizona. I smiled as I packed. I wore beige to the airport. I was invisible as they preferred me. But inside that silence, I was building a fortress. Nassau greeted me with humid air and bright skies. The taxi driver made a joke about retirement dreams. I smiled politely. He did not know I was not here to retire. I was here to protect the last thing in my life that still felt worth fighting for. My truth and the ghost of a girl who never got her 23rd birthday. The lawyer's office was tucked into a quiet street near the port. The name on the glass door read, Harris & Kent, Offshore Asset Management. Mr. Harris was a younger man, maybe late 30s, with a face that looked like it had never been denied anything. But he listened well and he did not interrupt. When I told him what I wanted, he blinked once, then leaned back. "You want to move all your domestic assets, home, land, investments, into an offshore irrevocable trust held under a foreign identity, and designate that all distributions are frozen until a clause is satisfied." "Yes," I said. "I want a clause that says nothing passes until the matter of Emily Rose Walker's disappearance is lawfully revisited and resolved." He paused again. "You know this kind of trust can't be undone even by you." I met his eyes. "Good. I do not want to be tempted." He smiled then, not mockingly, like a man who had met a woman he underestimated. The paperwork took 3 days. I stayed in a modest hotel, walked the shoreline every morning, and in the evenings, I sat on the balcony with a notebook, copying every clause by hand, just in case. I memorized the account numbers. I created a will that left nothing to Jared or Megan. I wrote letters to be mailed in the event of my death, one addressed to an investigative reporter I had admired for years, the others to 3 different attorneys in Oklahoma with no ties to my family. In the final draft of the trust document beneath the legal E's in the codes, I asked Harris to add a single sentence in plain English, justice for Emily, before comfort for anyone else. He looked at it and said, "You know, most people want these things quiet. You're making this one loud." "No." I said, "I'm just making it true." Before I left, I had a passport issued under the new name, Mary O'Connor. It felt strange in my hands, lighter than it should have, like holding someone else's future. When I returned to Oklahoma, Jared was waiting. Megan was with him. They acted like hosts, not children. Poured wine, served steak, asked about my trip in Arizona. I told them it was hot. They pretended to care. "You look good, Mom," Jared said, relaxed like you let something go. "I did," I said. "A burden," he smiled, thinking he had won. That I had given up. That the grave he dug in the garden had done its job. He had no idea that everything he wanted now belonged to a name he did not know existed. I moved everything. The deed to the house, the farmland from my father's side, Charles's old retirement fund, even the little account Emily and I had opened when she got her first poetry prize. All of it was transferred into the trust, frozen, untouchable, protected by the same system Jared thought only belonged to men in suits. He never asked why the tax statements stopped coming. He assumed Megan was handling them. He never questioned the silence because he thought silence meant surrender. I also updated the power of attorney, removed his name, assigned it to a private fiduciary I met through Harris's network, a woman named Camille, former military, now in finance. She had eyes that did not miss a thing. I liked her immediately. In the attic, I created a lockbox of documents separate from the trust, paper trails, photos, Emily's journal, a backup of the tape from the beach. I labeled it for the day they asked because they would eventually. One night, I sat alone with a cup of tea and pulled out the final sheet, the clause I had handwritten, and asked Harris to witness. In the event of my death, no estate shall be distributed until full investigation into the disappearance of Emily Rose Walker is reopened, completed, and made public record. This trust shall act as leverage for truth. My silence ends with my breath. I read it aloud to myself, then I signed. No tears, no hesitation. Because if no one was going to save me, I had to learn how to save myself. Not with shouting, but with law. Not with noise, but with precision. Jared thought he understood power, but he had only ever held it like a child's fire, dangerous, careless, and bound to burn. I, on the other hand, had learned to hold it like water, cool, quiet, and impossible to grasp when underestimated. He would learn soon. The invitations were printed on cream cardstock with embossed lettering as if formality could disguise intent. Celebration of legacy, it read. Jared had arranged the entire event himself. Caterers, string quartet, waitstaff dressed in navy. It was held in the very same garden where the first grave had been dug. This time there was no shovel in sight, only champagne. Megan greeted the guests with a practiced smile. "We're so glad you could join us for this very special family moment," she chirped, as if the last time we gathered, her husband had not threatened to bury me alive. Jared stood near the head of the long white cloth table, holding a leather-bound folio like it was scripture. "Today is about closure," he said, lifting his glass. "About honoring the past, securing the future, and keeping our family's legacy intact." He gestured for me to sit at the center seat, a throne among polished silverware. I did not resist. I wore blue again, the same shade I had worn at the last confrontation. It had become my armor. People clinked glasses, toasted to dignity and heritage. There were a few familiar faces. Our old neighbor, Jared's former teacher, a cousin who never called but always showed up for free wine. Their smiles wavered when I caught their eyes. They knew something was off. They just did not know where it sat on the table. Jared tapped the folio. "Now, as per the revised arrangements," he said, "we'd like to formally acknowledge the new structure of the estate. Mother has agreed to a more modern and efficient division of assets in line with current needs." He opened the folder and slid the papers toward me. I picked up the pen, held it, turned it in my fingers like it was unfamiliar. Megan leaned in, her voice soft but unmistakable. "Let's just do this, Rose. It's time." I looked at Jared. "Is it?" He gave me that same smile he used when he was 10 and had hidden a broken vase behind the couch. "Mom, this is for the best." I nodded. "You're right." And then I reached into my shawl. I pulled out the envelope. It was dark leather, worn at the edges, sealed with a brass clasp. I placed it on the table. The motion was slow, deliberate. People stopped chewing. Forks hovered midair. The quartet's notes stumbled, then faded. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is the real will." Jared laughed too loud. "Mom, come on. That's not—" "It's notarized in Nassau," I said, "under the name Mary O'Connor. Signed, witnessed, and sealed 6 months ago. Every asset, this home, the lands, the trust accounts, even the lake house was transferred to a protected offshore entity long before you thought of today's performance." The silence was volcanic. I opened the envelope and laid out a single page. Here's the summary. The full documents are with my attorney and the Bohemian Trust Office. The stipulations are simple. No inheritance will be distributed until a formal investigation into the disappearance of Emily Rose Walker is completed and made part of public record. The name landed like thunder. Emily guests looked at each other. At Jared, at me. "You don't have the authority," Jared said, voice cracking. "I had it the day your father died and left me everything. You only ever borrowed what I allowed." He stepped back. "This is a bluff. There's no investigation." "There will be," I said. "I submitted new evidence 2 weeks ago. A witness came forward. I recorded your threats in Florida. I have Emily's last journal entry, the one that says, "If anything happens to me, it won't be nature's fault." A woman at the table gasped. I did not look to see who. Megan's voice was barely a whisper. "You're lying." "No," I said. "You are." The documents lay between us like a chasm. "I remember the night she disappeared," I continued. "I remember how quickly you cleaned out her things. How fast you moved into this house. I remember the scarf that was never found, and the poem she never finished." Jared's hands were fists now. I stood slowly. "You dug a grave, Jared, but not for me and not for Emily. You dug it for the part of yourself that still knew right from wrong, and now it's come to collect." He lunged toward the documents, but someone grabbed his arm. It was Megan. "Stop!" she hissed. He looked at her, stunned. "What?" She pulled away from him, her face pale. "What did you do?" I stepped back from the table. "There's a reason the dead are called the departed. It's because they are not truly gone. They hover, they haunt, and when the time is right, they speak." The wind picked up, then, sudden and sharp. A napkin flew across the table. The candles flickered. I turned to the guests. "You came here to witness something, and you did. You witnessed the end of silence." I picked up the documents, folded them carefully, and slid them back into the envelope. Jared was breathing hard. Megan would not meet his eyes. I looked at them both. "This house is no longer yours. It never was. Everything you thought was waiting for you is now behind a door you cannot open. Not until Emily has her say." The guests began to rise, unsure of whether to speak or slip away. I left them all there in the garden among the roses that Emily once named. I walked back into the house she loved and locked the door behind me because the truth had bloomed. And no one could prune it now. I handed the detective the USB drive like I was offering a match to dry kindling. He looked at it, then at me, brows slightly raised. "What is this, ma'am?" "My son," I said, forgetting that the sea has ears. It was the recording I had made on the kayak in Florida. Jared's voice, calm, too calm, as he confessed his weariness, his entitlement, his plan. His final words before rocking the boat still haunted me. "You've had a good life. You've had enough." On the recording. My splash was audible, my silence afterward even more so. The detective listened to the first 30 seconds, then stopped the playback. "We'll need to log this and the original journal." I slid the Ziploc bag across the table. Inside it, Emily's soft brown leather journal, edges frayed, pages brittle from time, but the ink was still legible. On the second-to-last page, scrolled across a watercolor of a red tulip. She had written, "If anything happens to me, it won't be nature's fault." Start with Jared. They took photos of every page, every pressed flower, every circled date. The detective called in a second officer, a female one. They spoke in hushed voices, then asked me gently to go home and wait. I did not wait. I watched. I parked outside the courthouse the next morning, dressed in gray, hair tied up, invisible. Like most old women in this town, I had learned to blend into benches and doorways. But I saw the squad car pull up to Jared's office. I saw the moment he was let out in cuffs, face tight, jaw clenched, his suit jacket wrinkled like it had turned on him, too. News travels fast in Oklahoma. By sundown, every local Facebook group had a theory. Some called it a mistake. Others swore they always had a feeling. The most telling post came from a former classmate of Emily's. He hated that she was smarter, that she had more light. If you knew them, you knew it. Megan was gone before they even knocked on their front door. Disappeared. Left behind a single text to a mutual friend. I told him not to dig so deep. I told him the past isn't dirt. The next day, the DA announced the reopening of Emily's case. The fire marshal reclassified the car blaze as suspicious. A neighbor, quiet until now, came forward to say she had seen Jared and Emily arguing in the driveway that night. He grabbed her arm, she said. It wasn't brotherly. I watched the press conference from my living room. The house was silent except for the reporter's voice. Authorities are reviewing new evidence surrounding the 2017 disappearance of Emily Rose Walker, presumed dead after a car accident that may have been staged. Her brother, Jared Walker, is in custody, pending further investigation. I sat very still. The air around me didn't move. Then I reached for the photograph on the shelf. Emily at 17 laughing, wind in her hair, I whispered, "We're not done yet, sweetheart, but we're closer." Later that night, I found myself back in the garden. The roses had bloomed late this year, but they were brilliant, especially the red ones. Redemption, she had called them. I knelt beside the stone bench where Emily used to read her poems aloud. My knees ached. My hands trembled. But I dug anyway, just a few inches, not deep. Inside the tin box I had buried years ago were 2 copies of everything I gave the detectives. A backup. I pressed the lid shut and reread it, because stories need roots and justice needs insurance. I stood and looked at the sky. There were no stars that night, just a heavy rolling darkness above me, like the world was waiting for a verdict. But inside, I was not waiting. I was remembering because they thought signatures were everything. But a real mother does not sign with a pen. She signs with memory, with grief, with the unshakable knowledge of who her child really was and who tried to erase that truth. And memory, unlike signatures, cannot be forged. The letter came folded into a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name scrolled in handwriting. I had memorized long before I ever taught him how to write it. Jared, my son, the same boy who once held my hand at the doctor's office, who once cried when he saw a bird fall from a nest, the man who had tried to drown me, who may have killed his sister. I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before I opened it. Inside, his words bled onto the page like a man unraveling. There were no greetings, no dear mom, just confessions. I do not know how to explain what happened, he began, or tell me the words. Thomas's C is as long as memory, for Eleanor is 25 years. There is no excuse that can bring her back. If she is truly gone, there is no lie I can untell that will make you forgive me, and I do not expect forgiveness. But I remember things now, things I have tried to forget. I remember her laugh. I remember the poem she wrote for Dad's birthday. I remember the way you used to braid her hair. I remember hating that she was softer because I thought it made her weaker. But she was stronger than me, wasn't she? Stronger than both of us, he went on paragraph after paragraph. He said he had lost himself, that Megan had encouraged his ambitions, that he did not mean for the fire to happen, that it was an accident, that he just wanted her gone just for a while so he could claim what he thought was his. I see now what I've done. I see it in the silence of this cell, in the way the guards look at me, in the way I hear her voice in my dreams, and she never forgives me there either. He ended with a plea. Come visit. Please, let me look you in the eyes and tell you that I know I failed you, that I failed her. Let me try to be a son, even for a moment, even if you never speak to me again. I folded the letter fully and slid it into the drawer next to Emily's last journal. Then I picked up my keys and drove to the county jail. The building was gray, square, lifeless, the kind of place that felt cold even in summer. I walked through the metal detectors, handed over my ID, sat through the security check. They led me down a narrow hallway that smelled like bleach and sweat. The guard opened the door to the visitation room and nodded toward the glass partition. He's in booth 3. You've got 20 minutes. I sat down. Jared was already waiting on the other side of the glass. He looked thinner. His eyes were sunken. There was a tremor in his fingers as he picked up the receiver. I did not touch mine. His mouth moved. Mom. I shook my head. He froze. I reached into my purse, pulled out a small envelope of my own, and held it up. Then I slid it into the tray. He took it slowly, cautiously, as if it might explode. He opened it. Inside a single sheet of paper, 5 words handwritten in ink. You are no longer my son. He looked up, face drained of color. I stood. The guard opened the door. I paused just before I stepped out and turned back. My voice was calm, measured, but sharp enough to cut through glass. Justice takes time, Jared, but it always arrives. He pressed his hand to the glass, mouth moving rapidly now, too fast to follow. I walked away. Outside, the sky was the color of ash. It suited the moment. I stood in the parking lot for a while, breathing in the air. Then I got into my car and drove home, not with grief, but with clarity. At home, I lit a candle in the hallway. Emily used to say, candlelight made everything feel safer, softer. I watched the flame flicker and thought about all the ways a family can break, not with violence, but with decisions made in silence, in greed, in unchecked envy. That night, I wrote in my own journal, just one line. He thought he could drown guilt, but guilt swims. I slept well for the first time in weeks, not because I had peace, but because I had chosen my side and it was no longer his. The plane touched down on a cloudy Dublin morning. Rain tapped the window beside me like a gentle reminder. I had come through fire and flood, and now at the end of it all, water would welcome me home. Not the home I had known, but one where the truth could live without fear. I stepped off the jet bridge slowly, my knees stiff from hours in the air. The airport smelled like damp wool and strong coffee. Travelers rushed around me, businessmen, couples, students dragging backpacks twice their size. But I walked with purpose. I was not here for sightseeing. I was here because of a letter. 6 weeks after Jared's arrest, a package had arrived, no return address. Inside, a single photograph and a note. The photo was old, grainy, blurred by motion, but unmistakable. A woman with dark hair sitting on a bench near the River Liffey. She wore a blue coat. Her face was turned just slightly to the side. The angle should have made her features indistinct. But I would have known that posture anywhere. The note was written in a hand I had not seen in nearly a decade. "Mom, don't wait on the porch too long." I read the sentence over and over again, the Vietnamese phrase we had shared quietly in her childhood. "Don't wait too long on the porch, Mom." The last thing Emily had whispered to me the night she disappeared. She had kissed my cheek, scarf wrapped tight, a book of poetry tucked under her arm. Now here I was, half a world away, walking through the terminal with her name tucked into every heartbeat. I passed customs, stepped outside, and looked up into the soft Irish sky. It was misting, not raining, not yet. The kind of weather that made your coat damp, but your soul quieter. And then I saw her. She was standing near the cafe across the plaza, next to a man pushing luggage. She held a green umbrella, hair darker than I remembered, but pulled back in the same lazy knot she always wore when she was thinking. Her face was older, thinner, but her eyes, their weight, their warmth, their watching had not changed at all. He saw me, and she did not run. She walked every step slow, cautious, like a deer emerging from brush. I stood frozen, afraid to breathe, afraid the moment would collapse under the weight of my hope. Then she stopped 2 feet away and whispered, "Hi, Mom." I broke. I don't remember reaching for her, only the sensation of arms around me, of her cheek against my temple, of our bodies trembling in sync. She was warm, solid, breathing, alive. I felt her tears slide into my hair as I whispered, "I knew." She pulled back slightly, looked at me through the shimmer of rain and said, "He thought I was dead. He made sure everyone else believed it. But I couldn't stay there, not after what happened." We sat at the airport cafe. She told me everything. The night Jared called her to meet, the argument, his rage. The moment she realized he would not let her leave with her life or her voice. How she ran. How she flagged down a car, a stranger, a woman named Aoife, who took her in, hid her, helped her vanish. She had taken a new name, changed her hair. He lived quietly, first in Belfast, then across the water in Scotland, and finally here. She had worked at a bookstore, written under a pseudonym. She had even published a small poetry collection anonymously. "I watched the news," she said. "I saw the garden party. I saw your face. I thought you were going to die." "I almost did," I said, my voice steady. "But I didn't because I had a daughter once who taught me how to survive anything." Emily reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were longer now, stronger. "I kept the scarf," she said. "The yellow one. I never burned it like he wanted." I smiled. "He never knew you, not really." The rain fell harder outside. We left the cafe and walked along the riverbank. I told her everything about the trust, the offshore documents, the trial pending, about Megan vanishing, about Jared's face behind the glass. "I wrote him a note," I said. "S said he was no longer my son." Emily nodded. "He never was. Not really. Just a version of himself twisted too long in the dark." We walked until the clouds broke and the sun slipped between them like a secret. Pigeons scattered near the bridges. A street violinist played something soft and aching. She turned to me and asked, "Do you want to see where I live?" "I want to see everything," I said. We spent the afternoon in her flat, modest, filled with books, the air thick with lavender. She made tea. I found the framed photo of me she kept in the bedroom, taken when I was younger. I laughed. "You still have this always," she said. It reminded me that someone still knew the real me. As the sun set, we sat by the window. She leaned her head on my shoulder and I whispered, "They tried to bury me." She closed her eyes. I added, "But I lived." Then I looked at her, at this woman who was both my child and a stranger I would spend the rest of my life rediscovering. "And Emily," I said, "you never died." She smiled then, and in that moment, we were no longer ghosts. We were fire. We were rain. We were the truth that refused to stay buried. If you're still here listening, thank you. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a reminder that even the quietest mother can carry the sharpest memory. That silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. And sometimes the ones you try to bury come back holding the truth in both hands. I lived through what many wouldn't believe, but I didn't tell this for pity. I told it for the women still waiting on that porch, for the daughters still missing, for the mothers who remember everything even when no one asks. If this story touched you, if you felt the weight of every word, I ask one thing. And trust me, this was just one truth. There are many more, and I remember them,